Ed Gavin is a former deputy sheriff with the New York City Sheriff's Department. He joins us with his perspective on what this means for law enforcement. Ed Gavin, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Who's going to become a cop going forward, do you think?
Well, I think people will still become police officers. This really is a learning experience for everyone. Let's face it, what we saw in that video was pure savagery. I mean, the documentary evidence showed the police officer putting his knee on the perpetrator's neck while he was rear cuffed and his stomach was on the ground, causing positional asphyxia. So what I'd like to see, Tucker, is I'd like to see more training for police. I'd like to see the police trained as EMTs, like in the fire department. For example, in the New York City Fire Department, we have firefighters that are EMTs. But who gets to the scene first in most of these situations? It's the police. So in reviewing the tape, what I noticed was that the police officer removed the subject, Mr. Floyd, from his vehicle, and he was able to handcuff him, and then he was able to seat him on the ground, and he was handcuffed. At that point, they should have left him there. You know, there was no reason to move him, and obviously, Mr. Floyd was he was emotionally disturbed. And at that point, you may want to say, "Hey, Mr. Floyd, let me take your pulse." Things of this nature, and we have to change the way we deal with people. Now, I've used I've used force on literally over 500 people in my 21-year career in the New York City Department of Correction and in the New York City Sheriff's Department. I've never had anybody go unconscious. And, you know, that was clearly an excessive, unjustified use of force. I think the verdict was just. I think we had documentary evidence, we had testimonial evidence, and, you know, it was an open and shut case. But moving forward, what we need to do, in my opinion, is we need to have.
How about enforce the law? Okay, do we need to do that? So hold on, wait. Slow down. Do we enforce the law? Like, let's say people are going through the windows of Macy's and the cops are just standing there. Do they resign? No, because obviously their honor's being violated, but they're not doing anything about it. When do they start doing something about it and protecting everyone else, not just George Floyd?
No. I want people to protect. I want the police to protect people. But specifically what we're dealing with a person in custody who was handcuffed and he was subdued.
Right.
At that point, you know, we have to take a different tact. And one of the things I just want to suggest,
well,
Tucker,
I'm totally willing to believe that. Yep.
Yeah, the U.S. Department of Justice came out with a position paper on positional asphyxia and sudden death. It was published in 1995 and again in 1998. I think every law enforcement officer should read that. It should be read at roll calls. Because what it does, it talks about the physiology of a struggle. Now, like I said, Mr. Floyd was brought under control. What should have happened at that point is EMS should have been summoned, and he should have been placed in an ambulance. And a supervisor should have been called to the scene. I just think that it was excessive, and it shouldn't happen. And what I'd like to see,
the guy who did it looks like he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. So I'm kind of more worried about the rest of the country, which, thanks to police inaction, in case you haven't noticed, is like boarded up. So that's more my concern. But I appreciate you coming on, Ed Gavin. Thank you. Nope, done. Thank you. Heather McDonald is the author.